Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: Beijing appears to be increasing its ability to launch nuclear strikes against the U.S. What satellite images reveal about a mysterious complex taking shape in a desert in Xinjiang. Drones are changing the battlefield, not only in the sky but also at sea. The U.S. and two allies are working together to strengthen their maritime dominance and counter China.
You build smaller but still very lethal weapon platforms in larger number. So the sooner that you can get those types of unmanned vessels to the Pacific Ocean with munitions on board, that's going to be the metric to decide success, and the success is deterring China from a fight in the near future.
Beijing draws a red line, expelling an American reporter over Taiwan coverage. Washington responds in kind as Taipei condemns Beijing's tactics. Want to take Chinese technology, talent, or data overseas? Under Beijing's new outbound investment rules, you'll need permission first. And military-linked universities in China are pursuing NVIDIA's top AI chips, raising questions about U.S. efforts to control cutting-edge technology exports. Beijing appears to be increasing its ability to launch a nuclear strike against the U.S. What's driving the speculation is a military complex taking shape in the desert of China's northwestern Xinjiang region. The complex includes 80 launch pads, 3 octagon-shaped installations, and several bunkers. Launch pads are platforms used to launch missiles. The facilities are located near silos that store China's longest-range nuclear missiles, capable of reaching the U.S. Analysts told Reuters the developments suggest a major upgrade in Beijing's efforts to strengthen its nuclear strike capability. As for the launch pads, they could serve as vehicles capable of launching missiles from different locations. They may also be used for electronic warfare operations. Experts say the construction overall points to China's effort to strengthen protection of its land-based nuclear forces. A defense analyst at a think tank under Taiwan's defense ministry explains why Beijing has been narrowing its nuclear deterrent.
It's possible that China could launch a nuclear attack against the U.S. and Japan if they intervene in a conflict over Taiwan, especially if tensions escalate or there's a stalemate.
U.S. officials say China has been expanding its nuclear weapons capabilities faster than any other nation. A Pentagon report says Beijing could have 1,000 nuclear warheads within 4 years. The U.S. has also taken action. Last year, President Trump announced the Golden Dome missile defense system. It's designed to shield the continental U.S. from nuclear missile attacks from China and Russia.
In contrast to the current limited defense system, consisting of a single layer of ground-based mid-course defense interceptors, multiple terrestrial and space-based defensive layers will complicate adversary attack planning and provide more engagement opportunities to destroy incoming threats.
The Golden Dome could cost over $1 trillion over the next 2 decades, and partial funding for the missile defense system still requires approval from Congress. Increasingly, modern warfare is relying on drones more than ever. They can strike enemy military bases, fighter jets, and supply trucks without putting human lives at risk. And they're far cheaper than fighter jets carrying out the same missions. From the battlefields of Ukraine to conflicts in the Middle East, the way wars are fought is changing rapidly. And now drone use is expanding into the water. The U.S., UK, and Australia are accelerating cooperation on advanced undersea warfare systems. The 3 countries announced a project focused on undersea drones over the weekend, with deliveries expected to begin next year. The move aims to strengthen their combined maritime dominance and counter threats from China. And now the Trump administration, as it races to build out a massive fleet of the critical assets, looking beyond the major manufacturers, turning to startups and hobbyists. Why the shift? We spoke Monday with retired naval captain Brent Sadler. He's a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, focusing on naval warfare and advanced technology. He's also a former Pentagon official. Take a look. Now, today, the Washington Post reported that the Pentagon is turning to smaller companies and even hobbyists as part of its drone dominance contest. That's to make more small, low-cost attack drones. What do you make of this approach?
Well, I think it's inevitable for a couple things. One is the experience. I mean, if you go back to the Azerbaijan-Armenian War, this was preceded by about a year the war in Ukraine, which has made famous the use of drones, but also unmanned vehicles with increasing levels of autonomy. That has become a reality on the battlefield. But for the U.S. military, it's a different dynamic. It is, how do you deter or how do you pace a industrial Goliath that is the Chinese Communist Party, and how do you catch up with a deficit in industrial capacity? You build smaller but still very lethal weapon platforms in larger number. This includes, the biggest thing is with naval platforms, so unmanned surface vessels able to carry very advanced weapons. You're seeing that right now starting to mature with the delivery of some of these medium-sized unmanned vessels.
And digging into that, the Pentagon hopes to buy up to 300,000 drones through this contest with a budget of $1.1 billion. Now that works out to less than $3,700 per drone. Does that price point sound realistic and doable?
I think when you're talking about the smaller quadcopters, and if you start to produce at large scale, it's achievable. But that does not, I think, include the larger platforms you're going to need to be sustained for many months in a Pacific theater war, launching long-range strike weapons. Is quadcopters, the things you see in the battlefield in Ukraine, going after soldiers in trenches, just not going to cut it. But clearly, the other part of this is, even if you're going to build those, the electric motors are overwhelmingly sourced out of China, so we have a supply chain problem that we still have to deal with.
I want to get to China, but very quickly to your earlier point, what specific capabilities or specs is the Pentagon looking for in these drones to consider them successful?
Well, for deterring China in a fight over the future fate of Taiwan, it's the medium-sized and larger unmanned, or what they call optionally manned ships, because those are the only ones that have the ability to stay at sea for 30 days to 90 days in the open ocean of the Pacific, and to be able to carry the types of munitions like Tomahawk, cruise missiles, or SM-6s, which have a range of missions they can cover to take out aircraft and also missiles, but also ships at great range. You need a large platform. So the sooner that you can get those types of unmanned vessels to the Pacific Ocean with munitions on board, that's going to be the metric to decide success, and the success is deterring China from a fight in the near future.
And to your earlier points, there are growing concerns about drone parts coming from China. Now, China, of course, dominates the global drone industry, and even some of our law enforcement agencies rely heavily on Chinese components. Now, there are reports of trying to phase them out, but practically speaking, how easy is it to build out drones with a domestic supply chain?
Well, the business model as it exists right now, because you have highly subsidized, it's not an open market in China, you're going to have some intervention, unfortunately, to get there. The good thing is you've got a monster in this sector that is developing in Ukraine because of necessity. So with Ukraine's capacity, hopefully the war ends in the very near future. That capacity's got to go somewhere. So you're going to have a supply that's going to drive down the price of many of these drones if Ukraine continues to produce them. But that's not sustainable. That's not the right type of drone for the U.S. military. But again, we have to take a very serious and close look at our supply chain. The electric motors are the most obvious, but it's not the only one. And it's going to be a little costly up front until we actually get industry in the United States at scale producing all the components for the drones from the small to the large.
And to your point, what kind of strategic risks does this pose to the United States if we fail to match China's drone production capabilities?
Well, we won't be able to get firepower to sea. The traditional Navy ships are aging out faster than we can build them. And it takes 3 to 5 years to build a cruiser or destroyer, an aircraft carrier. It takes many years. And if we don't have drone or unmanned vessels with these advanced weapons on board, we're not going to be able to have the firepower at sea that we need. China takes note of that, and they're less and less deterred by us. So if we don't get our hands around this in the very near future, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where it's China that dictates the terms or the context or the timing of a future fight, not us.
Well, on that note, Brent Sadler, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tensions are rising as China and the U.S. both expel reporters. China on Monday said it opposes the U.S. revoking the visa of a Chinese journalist working in the U.S. for Xinhua, a Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece. Washington's action follows Beijing's decision to expel a New York Times reporter after the paper interviewed Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te. A spokesperson for Taiwan's presidential office said Taiwan would not be silenced by oppression. The State Department told the Epoch Times that the U.S. cannot accept the continued lack of reciprocity for U.S. media in China. It's rare for the U.S. government to directly retaliate in response to Beijing's expulsion of American journalists. Sung Xue, the editor-in-chief of China Spring magazine, told NTD that such countermeasures were long overdue.
When the Chinese Communist Party uses such unreasonable tactics against American media and journalists, the United States should respond with appropriate and timely countermeasures.
For years, the Chinese regime has imposed strict controls on foreign journalists.
Foreign journalists are typically monitored while working in China, and those who raise questions that crosses the regime's red line, such as Tibet, Uyghurs, Falun Gong, Hong Kong, or Taiwan, could face immediate sanctions from Beijing.
In contrast, Chinese state-owned media have operated freely in the U.S. and other Western countries for years, using press freedom to promote Beijing's propaganda.
For a long time, Western democracies have largely accepted the CCP's approach, and that's allowed Beijing to deeply infiltrate our societies.
A notable change came during President Trump's first term. The U.S. capped the number of Chinese nationals allowed to work for Chinese state media in the U.S. to about 100. Still, Shen Xue says allowing Chinese state media to operate in the U.S. could indirectly influence U.S. elections. She noted that many Chinese immigrants consume news from Chinese language outlets in the U.S., many of which are controlled by Beijing or its proxies.
So even though these Chinese immigrants live in the U.S., a lot of the information they're exposed to, including news and analysis, tend to line up with Beijing's narrative. And over time, as they keep taking that in, their views can gradually shift to be more aligned with the Chinese Communist Party rather than the U.S.
It's worth noting many such readers influenced by Beijing propaganda live in highly contested congressional districts in California and New York. Sheng noted that CCP propaganda could potentially influence their voting decisions in favor of pro-Beijing candidates, which could in turn harm U.S. interests. Beijing has been spending heavily to influence U.S. politics, spending $280 million from 2016 to 2020, more than any other foreign country. 1 month after Beijing forced Meta to unwind its $2 billion acquisition of AI startup Manus, China is now turning that kind of intervention into law. On Monday, Beijing issued new regulations on outbound investment as part of a broader push to keep AI assets at home. The regulations take effect July 1st and apply not just to mainland China, but also to deals in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Under the new framework, investors are prohibited from transferring restricted goods, technology, services, or data overseas without prior authorization. That includes indirect transfers, such as sending technical staff abroad, running cross-border training programs, or providing remote technical guidance. The rules also specifically ban cross-border talent transfers in sensitive sectors. Analysts say the target is what's known as Singapore washing, the practice of moving employees and operations overseas ahead of a foreign acquisition. Manus itself did this before Meta's buyout. Investors who violate the rules can be ordered to halt transactions or dispose of assets. They may also face fines of up to 1% of the investment amount. And in a significant retaliatory clause, Beijing can now ban foreign entities from trading with or investing in China. It can also revoke work visas and residency rights for foreign nationals if their home countries or organizations restrict Chinese investment. At the same time, the regulation says that detailed rules will govern outbound investment by Chinese resident individuals and other relevant investors. Coming up, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says there are long-term problems between the U.S. and China that they need to address. It takes not just years, but perhaps decades.
We just can't live in a world in which we rely on anybody for 90% of what we get in one sole source that could be cut off at any time as leverage against us or punishment or in a time of conflict.
Military-linked universities in China are pursuing NVIDIA's top AI chips, raising questions about U.S. efforts to control cutting-edge technology exports. And at Asia's biggest security summit over the weekend, dozens of countries sent their defense ministers, but China did not. What does that signal? More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Secretary of State Marco Rubio testifying on the State Department's budget request Tuesday morning. He spoke about his recent visit to China and the state of U.S.-China relations, saying there are long-term problems that need addressing, which may take not just years, but perhaps decades.
We understand that there are areas in which long-term we're going to have some real challenges, whether it's supply chains. Put it to you this way. Let's leave China aside for a moment. The United States, and I would argue the world, cannot depend on one country for 90% of anything, especially 90% of things that are critical to our economies, not from our weapon systems to our pharmaceuticals. We just can't live in a world in which we rely on anybody for 90% of what we get in one sole source that could be cut off at any time as leverage against us or punishment or in a time of conflict. And so we are actively searching and have plans in place, and we're implementing these to diversify where we get critical minerals, where we get our supply chain, secure that supply chain. And obviously the Chinese would like to retain their monopoly position in some of these.
Chinese universities with ties to Beijing's military are pursuing advanced NVIDIA AI chips. A Bloomberg report out Monday is raising questions about where some of America's most powerful AI technology could ultimately end up. The report found several Chinese universities connected to military and defense programs are seeking NVIDIA's H200 chips. That's despite U.S. efforts to keep cutting-edge processors out of military hands. Records reviewed by Bloomberg show at least 7 Chinese universities linked to defense and military programs have sought access to NVIDIA's H200 chips. 2 of those schools are part of China's 7 Sons of National Defense, a group known for supporting military research and development. Both schools have already been placed on a U.S. blacklist for supporting China's military programs. Bloomberg's report found more than 25 military-linked universities and research labs are already using or seeking access to older NVIDIA AI chips. Some institutions reportedly attempted to acquire the technology through third-party brokers. The findings underscore the strong demand for NVIDIA's chips, even as China pushes to develop homegrown semiconductors. They also highlight the challenge facing U.S. policymakers trying to prevent cutting-edge AI technology from aiding Beijing's military. The findings raise new questions about whether current U.S. restrictions go far enough. The European Union is set to join Pax Silica, a U.S.-led coalition focused on AI chip supply chain and export controls. The initiative was launched by the Trump administration last December. It's designed to secure global supply chains for AI chips, critical minerals, and other advanced technologies. The goal is to reduce reliance on China. At Asia's premier defense summit over the weekend, dozens of nations sent their top defense ministers, except China. Beijing opting instead for a low-level delegation. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth warned of China's growing military ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. And Japan's foreign minister fired back at the Chinese Communist Party for labeling Japan as embracing new militarism. From the Chinese side, a major general trying to hold his ground. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more on what the lowering of the level of Chinese representation may mean.
The Chinese delegation was led by a lower-level official, Major General Meng Xiangqing, an academic from the National Defense University. Defense Minister Dong Jun did not go. Dong Jun succeeded former Defense Minister Li Shangfu, who was stripped of his rank, disappeared, and sentenced to death for bribery. Over 36 senior commanders and generals have been purged over the past few years. This includes the top former general and former vice chairman Zhang Youxia, who was Xi Jinping's second in command. All of this has been raising some serious questions about the stability of China's military currently. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
South Korea and Japan are considering a deal to share military supplies and work more closely on defense. South Korea's defense secretary says the idea was raised during talks with Japan at a major Asian defense summit in Singapore over the weekend. The proposed deal would allow the two U.S. allies to share supplies like fuel, food, and ammunition during emergencies or joint operations. Officials say it could deepen trilateral security cooperation with the U.S. as tensions with China remain high in the region. But Seoul is urging caution, citing political sensitivities and the need for public support in both countries. South Korea's defense minister says any agreement would require careful discussion before moving forward. Meanwhile, the two countries also discussed holding a joint search and rescue exercise later this month for the first time in about 9 years. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.